So our afternoon speaker this afternoon is Dr. George Perry, who's a professor at Texas A&M University based in the Overland Research Center in Texas. He's going to be talking to you guys about using natural service and estrus synchronization, how to be successful with that. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shelby. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here. We're going to move from talking on the female side to talking more on the male side. And so when we think about that, we have tremendous technologies with synchronization and AI, but there's a lot of situations where natural service is still used. And so how do we apply some of these technologies to the natural service side? And I want to acknowledge Dr. Dalton, who was up here just a minute ago. Dr. Dalton and I have worked together in this area and collaborated back and forth for several years now. And so to look at things, when we think about the herd bull, even for when we're doing synchronization in AI or fixed time AI, most operations on the beef cattle side will synchronize in AI one time. And then they go out with the cleanup bull. But there's many situations when we're trying to get started that working with natural service will actually benefit things. And we need to realize that herd bull plays a tremendous role in the profitability of your operation. So if we look, herd bulls influence overall fertility. If we think about it, if you run a single sire pasture, and I usually get at least one call a year in situations like this, a single sire pasture, what happens if that bull gets injured? Now the interesting ones are ones where, oh, we did our preg checks, we ran 20% conception rates or pregnancy rates for the breeding season, we just tested the bull and he tested fine. If that bull gets injured during the breeding season, and we'll talk about it in more detail, can have a tremendous impact of what's going on. And so he does. He influences overall fertility. He influences that entire calf crop. Bulls with low fertility have impacts on the percent calf crop weaned. If you look at profitability of your operation, percent calf crop weaned is one of the largest factors. We need those calves weaned to be able to sell them. And then, of course, weaning weights, carcass traits, all of those things, he's supplying half the genetics to every bit of them. And so Joe showed this a while ago. I was fortunate we worked with US Mark. So actually, this graph, there's over 10,000 animals in the US Mark system. The other graph that Joe showed that I'm not going to put up here was our producers in South Dakota because it was a bigger dramatic effect. And so the reason I like to show this is what happens when US Mark runs low on hay. As a federal facility, they can't let their cows fall apart. They're all on research projects. They have to go buy more hay. What happens when you run low on hay? What happens when a drought hits? You sell cows. Or they lose condition. And so when we look at this, this is an optimal situation, which is why it was even more dramatic when we were looking at producers' herds. But we can see getting cows bred early impacts longevity, impacts calf crop, impacts weaning weights. And so we see, why do we keep losing the screen? So we can see more cows staying in the herd longer. And what this was these were heifers that only conceived if they conceived their first year. So anybody who didn't conceive and have that first calf was not included. So we remove any of that infertility that might be in heifers. If we look at their longevity, those first 6 calves had significantly heavier weaning weights. And so it's really like describing a snowball effect. As we get more cows bred early, they continue to breed earlier, and we're able to keep building off of those benefits. And so for those first 6 calves, that increased weaning weight, look at price per pound right now, is definitely a benefit to your profitability. So as we think about that, and we've heard about it all morning, what tools are out there? Estrus synchronization. We've had a lot of discussion this morning on synchronization. And we need to remember the differences and the benefits of both. So I talked about the bull providing half the genetics. That's true whether it's the AI or natural service. So we get genetic progress from the bull. We get more cows bred early from synchronization. And so as we think about that, exactly that. More cows bred early, more predictable time of when they come into heat, older, heavier calves. It can facilitate AI because it can reduce heat detection. So I spent 17 years at South Dakota State. Right when I was leaving, we were wrapping up this study. And so we took 11 herds that all they had ever done was open up the gate and turned out a bull. And what's different, instead of comparing year to year, we convinced those producers to split their herd in half. And so they were grouped by days postpartum, they're equal between the groups, all of that. But what you can see in the light gray bar is natural service. That's what these herds have done for years. They just opened up the gate and turned the bull out. The other half of their herd we synchronized. Same pasture, same bull, same timing. Look at the difference in the amount of cows bred early. And so that's within an operation. Just by applying synchronization, we can see that line shifting. And if we break it down, 7 days, 14 days, 21, and 42, if you look, 7 and 14, there's a benefit to synchronization. When we get out to 21 days, statistically they're similar. So why is that? As we talked about this morning, the estrus cycle. With synchronization, what are we doing? We're getting them season. By 21 days, they've all cycled. That bull has had a chance to breed all of them, and so we should be similar. So what we're doing is just shifting that distribution. But when I add an extra 14 days of weaning weight to those calves, what did we just do? At current prices, we've added quite a bit to profitability. So this is what's been talked about this morning. The Beef Task Force goes through every year, looks at what protocols are giving the best success for AI. So we have protocols, and it's got the top cut off there, but this is for heifers, for cows, and sex semen. Are any of these protocols the ones you would be using with natural service? No. What is the goal when we're AIing? I want as many cows in heat in as short a period of time as possible. Or we move to fixed time AI. We can't do that with natural service. So we have a different group of protocols that works well in those situations. And so just like with synchronization and AI, we need to start by asking some questions. What do you want to accomplish? What is your goal in doing it? Do we want the most possible pregnancies? Do we want the shortest calving season? And somebody may say, well, those two are the same. Well, no. If I want the most possible pregnancies, if I want the shortest calving season, I want them as tight as I can get them. That may not be the same as the most possible pregnancies. Do I want to move late calvers out? Worked with a lot of herds doing this with natural service. What do you do with those late calving cows that I showed earlier, fall out of the herd earlier? How do we get them moved up? How do we get them back to the start of the calving season? More cows calving early? Do you need to know who the sire is? And that becomes an important question when we're talking about synchronization with natural service. Because as we go through this, we'll talk about serving capacity of that sire and how we manage bulls either as single sires or multiple sires to understand what they can accomplish. Now, yes, we have technologies. We can DNA type them, and I'll talk about that. But is it important? If you're just selling calves, is it critical to know? And then the other part is, what are your facilities like? Time, labor, facilities, familiarity with protocols. So we've talked about the protocols this morning. You should understand what the different drugs do. But when we talk about natural service, we remove the heat detection part, we remove the AI part, but different protocols still require different amounts of time and labor. So let's look at the actual protocol. So if we're going to synchronize with natural service, what protocols are recommended? If you look, these two protocols are recommended for cows or heifers, either one. So we can turn a bull out. 5 days later, give them all a shot of prostaglandin. Doesn't matter who that bull's bred. Why is that? As we learned earlier, prostaglandin is not going to affect that corpus luteum in the first 5 days. So if the bull bred a cow the day before you give it a shot of prostaglandin, it's not going to hurt anything. And so what does that do? That allows those first 5 days that bull to breed what's coming in naturally. After the shot of prostaglandin, the rest of them should cycle over about the next 5 to 7 days. What's the downside of that protocol? Prostaglandin only works if they have a corpus luteum. So if we want to use it, they have to already be cycling. The other protocol, we can put a cedar in for 7 days, remove it, and then turn out the bull. If you notice, there's no injections in there. If I give the injections, where I give a GnRH at the beginning and a prostaglandin at the end, now we're at the cosync plus cedar, and they're going to show heat over the next 72 hours. When I do it like this with just the cedar and no shots, they're actually going to spread out estrus over the next 10 to 14 days. So both of those protocols allow us to utilize our bulls the best we can by not trying to overpower them. If we're on the heifer side, we can feed MGA for 14 days. Now if you look up there, day 16 to 20 it says estrus, but we don't turn the bull out till day 24. Well, just like other protocols, we'll feed MGA for 14 days. We're going to create a persistent follicle. Those cows are going to come in estrus. That oocyte is aged, and fertility is going to be low. So what happens if you turn your bull out before then? He's going to spend a lot of effort breeding those cows when the fertility on the female side is lower. So when we wait to day 24, we get over that decrease fertility, and then the bull is able to breed them as they come into heat after that. So what studies have looked at these? So if we look, one single shot of prostaglandin compared to non-synchronized over a 4-day period of time, we can see animals that were cycling, 55% of them conceived. If they're not cycling, no benefit. The MGA, we can see 62% over 7 days compared to 23% that was not cycling. Synchromate B was an old protocol we don't have access to anymore. If we look at the bottom one, the cedar is the 7-day cedar with no injections. Over 10 days, 43% versus 35%. And so we see how we do pull those animals up sooner. If we compare it over 21 days, so if we look a single shot of prostaglandin for 80 hours, 80 hours exposure to the bull versus 21 days exposure to the bull, statistically there's no difference there. The next one, 25 days, we can see no difference. And even the cedar at 30 days, there's no difference. So it brings up exactly what I was talking about earlier, that those animals that respond, conceive early with natural service, at the end of one full cycle, there shouldn't be a difference. For people who are more visual, this study, there was herds all across the country. And we can see 7 14-day benefit to those that had the cedar exposure. One of the herds in this study we had in South Dakota, and the producers were very worried. And I'll get to this towards the end of the presentation, but they had 400 cows. We put cedars in half of them. They were all getting turned out in one big group, and they were supposed to turn out 20 bulls on 400 cows, with half of the cows synchronized. The day they were supposed to turn out the bulls, one of them got injured. And they were scared to death. You synchronize these cows, we only have 19 bulls, they're not going to handle anything. And part of the reason they were interested in doing this study was their breeding season had gotten drug out to over 100 days. When we came in and did the initial preg check, their conception rates in the synchronized group were over 60% in the first 30 days. So by day 60 of the breeding season, I told them just pull the bulls. So they had 19 bulls out with 400 cows, dropped it to a 60-day breeding season, and they still ended up with 94% of them bred in 60 days. So they reduced their breeding season by 40 days. And yes, they actually did. They gave up. They dropped from 96% to 94%. But they sure were appreciative the next year at calving when they had 40 days less of calving. And so we can see the benefits there. And so one of the biggest benefits using natural service, we don't have to go out and do the heat detection. That's the bull's job, if he does it right. But the limitation becomes the serving capacity. What can that bull handle? And so to begin to look at that, is your herd bull a satisfactory potential breeder? Is he good to go out and do the job? And how do you know? Well, there's quite a few advertisements that'll tell you he's great. You know, look at any bull sale. 2-year-old registered Angus bull for sale, semen tested, ultrasounded, bred and raised to work. Should be great, right? What did they do to him? What is a semen test? When you see something like that, is a semen test a breeding soundness exam or not? It really depends who you talk to. To me, it's not. You can do a semen test, somebody can collect an ejaculate. Yeah, there's motile semen, looks good. That's not a breeding soundness exam. We'll get into the parts of the breeding soundness exam in a minute, but a breeding soundness exam covers a lot more than looking at semen quality. When should a BSE be done? When are bull sales in this part of the country? February, March? When do you turn bulls out for breeding? May, June? Is that breeding soundness exam that was done in January before the bull sale still good in June? Is a bull that failed the breeding soundness exam in January okay to turn out in June? I've seen both. We put on a bull clinic in Miller, South Dakota one January because we had plenty of producers who were willing to bring their bulls in January. We had a bull come in that had frostbite all over his scrotum. We could not find a normal sperm. Every one of them was abnormal when we looked at it. Good concentration, but all abnormal. And I don't have time in this presentation to go through all the abnormalities and how they affect fertility, but by the time he was turned out in June, he had passed the breeding soundness exam and done great. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen a bull pass a breeding soundness exam, get injured, and get no cow's bread. And so we need to realize, how long is that breeding soundness exam good for? Semen quality, semen production is a continuous process. What we collect today is a snapshot. So how many producers actually do it? If we look at the national data, semen testing, depending on herd size, 51% of small producers, 87% of medium, 96% of large, when they purchase, lease, or borrow a bull. I also threw in there the trick test, 47, 62, 67. I'm sure some of that with the trick test depends because a lot of bulls that are sold are virgin bulls. The one that worries you is the leased or borrowed bulls. So let's change the question. If that bull was on your property, how many of them are tested before they're turned out the second year? Quite a drop there. I just said I don't trust the breeding soundness exam that was done in January, or I'm going to turn them out in June. What was done about January last year to this year? We can see overall 31%. The trick test, one of the reasons putting that in is I know it occurs. There's bulls that are borrowed, there's bulls that are leased. There's cow herds that are visited by neighbors' bulls. What happens if there's one bad bull in a group? This is an example for trick. He comes in, he breeds a cow, she gets bred. She loses that pregnancy. How many other bulls breed her? And guess what? Every one of them will now be infected. We could change the scenario and say we have one infertile bull. We turn him out. We wouldn't have the pregnancy part, but what happens when he's the dominant bull out there? So we need to understand what our bulls are doing. So a breeding soundness evaluation. I said there's more to it than just the semen test. It starts with the physical exam, eyes, feet, legs. Any idea how many bulls fail a breeding soundness exam due to the physical exam? When you look at the surveys and the data on it, it's not very many. Does that mean all of our bulls are just great structured? And no, y'all don't take those in to have them tested. If they've got cancer eye, if they can't walk, they never get tested. So that's not the reason most bulls fail a breeding soundness exam. But it's still critical to be done as part of the breeding soundness exam. Palpating the testes is a little bit more. When you palpate a testy and it's hard as a rock, you know, don't have very high expectations for what you're going to get out. The next part, scrotal circumference. Scrotal circumference is one of those things that we've done a great job selecting for. And it does. It improves fertility. What does scrotal circumference truly tell us? It tells us how much testicular mass there is. So why do we select for bulls that have larger scrotal circumferences? Because the more testicular mass there is, the more sperm they produce each day. The more sperm they're able to produce, by producing more sperm, they're able to carry that on. There's also the correlations with bulls with larger scrotal circumferences. Their daughters reach puberty younger. Their sons have larger scrotal circumferences. And so it's a trait that's been selected for that we need to remember to continue to select for. There was a study done a few years ago that said scrotal circumference was no longer correlated with age at puberty. If you looked at just that paper, they're correct. There wasn't a correlation. But I disagree with it some because there's a limit to how early we can push puberty. And what we don't want is to start going backwards. So that's why there's still minimum scrotal circumferences to pass a breeding soundness exam. And then the part that most people think of is the semen evaluation. Motility, morphology. How good is the semen that's being produced? So when we classify bulls, they're classified as satisfactory potential breeders, unsatisfactory, or deferred. Now, if you read the wording in there, it's important. A satisfactory potential breeder means they meet all the minimums. For scrotal circumference, motility, morphology, physical problems, does that guarantee he's going to have great fertility? No, because there's things we don't measure in a breeding soundness exam that you need to be watching for. But he has the opportunity to go out and do a good job. If he's unsatisfactory, that means he failed something and there's not much hope of him recovering from it. Deferred is one of those, just like I mentioned the bull with frostbite. He would be listed as deferred because the odds were good he was going to recover from it. And he did. So that means he needs to be retested. Is his semen getting better? You'll also see this a lot on young bulls. Because when we think about spermatogenesis, if we go from the very first cell division all the way through, we're at 60.5 days. So when we do a breeding soundness exam, we're actually looking at what has happened to that bull over the past 2 months. And Dr. Sept, who was at Virginia Tech, had some very neat models that you could apply insults to the scrotum and see exactly what stage of development sperm was in when it was collected at different days. And so the most interesting herds that I usually get called about are ones where we turned out a bull, we've got a bunch of cows bred early, and then nothing, and then a bunch of cows bred late. What do I do with all these late bred cows? And you start asking questions, and usually it's in a single sire pasture, and how long the breeding season was, and you can tell that bull got injured when he got turned out with the cows. He recovered from it, and there's no that gap in the middle. And so that's why it's important that we watch our bulls, because at any one of these stages, if a bull gets injured, it's going to affect that stage of development. That can be heat stress, that can be stepped on, kicked, running a fever, any of those things, and it's not going to improve until he recovers from that injury. And so when he's recovered from that injury, 61 days later, his sperm should return to normal. And so as we're looking at these, this is the form. This is the current form. So recent changes, they've removed gross motility. And if you remember back, there used to be primary, secondary abnormalities. Now it's listed as head, mid-piece, and tail, because primary and secondary really depended more on handling or stage of development, and not necessarily what the abnormality was. Because we know if there's a lot of proximal droplets, usually that's immaturity. That's a different one than if the heads are broken off from the tails, which could be handling or it could be something else. And so there's a lot more description that goes in, but the minimum progressive motility, so head first movement, is 30%. Morphology, 70%. So we need 70% normal sperm with at least 30% moving head first. And that's important because if you look at a ejaculate, a lot of times you'll see what's called a swirl, just movement. Not all of those sperm are going to be moving in the correct direction. I've seen sperm swim sideways, I've seen sperm swimming backwards. Those aren't the ones that are going to get the job done. So when we look at some of the details, here's over almost 3,000 BSEs on beef bulls. 82% satisfactory, 15% deferred, 3% unsatisfactory. Beef and dairy bulls, 37% unsatisfactory. Dairy bulls, 36. We can see there's a decent percentage of bulls that will fail each year. And Dr. Chenoweth, when he was at K-State, went around one year and randomly tested bulls. And he found a good percentage he would have classified as subfertile out of those herds that aren't testing. And so it goes back to, just because a bull has passed once in his life, is he always good? Or is he hurting your conception rates or your pregnancy rates? When we think about return on investment, usually around $50, it's been estimated the cost ratio, $20 for each dollar invested. And it's probably higher than that now with where calf prices are. A $50 investment, one calf, we're talking a lot of return. So what are the things that you need to be watching for that aren't evaluated in that breeding soundness exam? I was fortunate a few years ago, was doing a meeting with Dr. Barth up in Canada. They've probably done as much research as anybody on libido. And he shared these pictures with me. So this is scientifically how you test libido in a bull. You get a cow that's in estrus, you stanchion her, and you turn bulls out and look for their activity. So these are two Charolais bulls they turned out. Which bull do you think has better libido? You can tell one's a lot older than the other, but which one do you think has better libido? We can be interactive here. How many of you think the bigger bull? How many of you think the little bull, the white one? Yeah, but the white one has better. So in reality, this was their behavior. And Dr. Barr's comment was, he said that big bull did it every time. He said never once did he go breed a cow. Said if you did a BSE on him, his semen quality looked great. And he said the only reason he lived on the research center was because most producers did not believe a bull would not go breed a cow. And so how do you practically measure this? When you turn out your bulls, do you watch them? Do you go out to the pastures and see what they're doing? Do you do it driving by? I used to tell people in South Dakota, okay, if you're going to do it driving by, put big pink ear tags in your bulls. Because a lot of times it's hard to pick out the bull from the cows. And so if you see a lot of mounting activity, it doesn't necessarily mean the bull is doing what he's supposed to. So let's talk about bull power. Here's an advertisement. Bull power is key to achieving compact calving. Yearling bulls, 10 to 15, older bulls, 1 to 20 to 1 to 30. Help them out keep inseminating. Of course, they're trying to sell semen. But what is the proper ratio? It varies widely. We can look in the literature and find all kinds of things. It really depends on the bull. Has he ever bred cows before? Breeding is actually a learned behavior. And so yes, it is lower for younger bulls, but we can see in the literature anywhere from 1 to 10 to 1 to 60. And usually when I say 160, people are there, oh, well, that's way too high. If that group is not synchronized, how many cows should be in heat each day? Well, if we make the math easy and we say it's a 20-day estrus cycle, if 100% are cycling, we should say 5% each day. If I turn out a bull at 1 to 20, I'm asking him to breed 1 cow a day. 1 to 40 is only 2. So yes, if we're going to synchronize, we need to consider that. We need to consider his age, his experience. Of course, semen quality. We need to watch for libido. We need to monitor our bulls just like our cows. But if we look, this study actually looked at it in synchronized females. 1 to 16, 1 to 25, 1 to 50. You see the number of bulls, 100 heifers in the pasture, so you have those different ratios. 6-day pregnancy rate. Even at 1 to 50, that's not that bad. Those 2 bulls bred 38% in 6 days. But if we look, the 1 to 25 and 1 to 16 was higher at 41 and 53%. But there's no difference between those two. 28-day. 83, 84% for the 1 to 25, 1 to 16, 77% for the 1 to 50. So if you put the dollar figures on it, where's the most profitable one? Somewhere around that 1 to 25. Now remember, this is in synchronized animals. What's the average? So that same national survey, yearling bulls across all of them 1 to 15. Mature bulls 1 to 22. Most of the bulls we have are underutilized. They should be able to handle that in a synchronized herd. And so when we think about that, one of the questions I asked is, do you need to know who the sire is? So Allison Van Eneman is in California, ran this study, multiple sire pasture. They had 27 sires. They had 625 cows. They DNA typed all the calves. 5 of the sires produced over 50% of the calves. 10 produced no progeny. So they had 27 sires and had no return from 10 of them. So what is your annual cost on your bulls? They're the most expensive animal on your place. Not necessarily just what they eat, but what they tear up too. So is it important for you to know? We have the DNA technology, a simple blood test or hair follicles. If you need to know, and if you're in the purebred side, most purebred operations or most associations have gone to it, you can determine who the sire is even in these situations. How many people are doing it? About 3%. So it really comes down to, do you need to know who the sire really is? But if you're one of those that has 27 sires on 600 cows, and 10 of them are producing no calves, do you need all 27? But how do you know which ones you need? Unless they're different breeds and you can pick things out, we have the technology to look into it. So what could be the reason for this? If I turn bulls out into a pasture, shouldn't they breed all the cows? Well, I've talked about libido. What about social dominance? That hierarchy. Big bulls hurt little bulls. If you're doing multiple sire pastures, keeping age and size bulls together is important. But even within that, they will still come up with their own dominance hierarchy. But yes, I have seen big bulls knock little bulls off of a cow. I've seen broken penises. All of these different injuries just because he wasn't the dominant bull trying to do his job. So exactly that. Size and age. We need to keep bulls together. If we're going to do that, we need to put bulls together before the breeding season. So they figure out their social dominance before they go out and aren't trying to figure it out while in the breeding pasture. So several of you have heard me talk also on herd fertility. And one of the comments I usually make on herd fertility is it's in the details. So if we think about this, a dominant bull with poor semen quality or a low libido will likely blank pregnancy rates. What's that going to be? Yep, decrease pregnancy rates. For the herd, even when more blank subdominant bulls present. Even when you have more fertile bulls out there, that dominant bull is going to take charge. And so it's the same thing I always tell people on the female side. The poorest performing activity cancels out everything you do great. So if we look at the equation of reproduction, your lowest performing activity, you will never do better than. So your poorest bull out there, if he's your dominant bull, is going to hurt your overall conception rates. So avoid putting young and older bulls together. Make sure your groups are grouped together before the breeding season so they can work this out before the start of the breeding season. So in talking about it, how many cows can a bull inseminate? So looking at synchronized females, beef bulls average 55 services during a 30-hour period of time. And you can see there the range was 14 to 101. Services per female average 3, range of 1 to 13. And that's when the bull to cow ratios was 1 to 10 to 1 to 35. So unlike when we AI and we put a fraction of an ejaculate into a cow, that bull is going to put on average 3 ejaculates into each cow. So does that impact his fertility on the next cow? So does breeding a cow more than once impact his fertility? Holstein bulls, this was done on Holsteins, produce approximately 5 million sperm per minute. How many sperm are in an ejaculate? Roughly 5 billion. So we're talking every 10 minutes, the equivalent of another ejaculate is produced. So do we deplete their supply? So this was a study, this was a master's student with Dr. Sacchi. They took bulls. There was 4 bulls and they tried to deplete them. So basically they ran the bulls into the chute, did an electroejaculation on them, let him out, brought the next one in. When they finished bull number 4, bull number 1 came right back in. I'm sure by the end of this, the bulls were not happy. But there's 14 collections there, all back to back. What did they see? Yeah, volume went down, 7 mils to 4 mils. Concentration per mil did decrease from 1.1 billion to just over 200 million. Total sperm in the ejaculate went from over 8 billion down to 900 million. No change in motility, no change in percent normal. So even after 14 consecutive ejaculates, 900 million sperm per ejaculate. How many does it take? 1. 1 in the right place at the right time. Out of 900 million, there's still enough sperm being produced So can we actually deplete them? Yes, we worry about their capacity. With young bulls, we worry about them falling in love. They'll chase one cow when another one might be in heat. So that comes to us watching our cows, but we can see bulls are very capable in synchronized programs. And so with that, I think I got time for one or two questions maybe. Yes? Is there a heritability component for a breeding soundness exam? Not that I have seen. There are, so I should preference that. A breeding soundness exam is almost like saying, is there a heritability for pregnancy rate? Because there's different things in it. Scrotal circumference is heritable. Actually, libido, there's some heritability too. So if we break it down into individual components, there are some heritabilities. When we put it all together, just like with pregnancy, management can overtrump the genetics. So injury, things like that, or even more so is development method. And I think there's going to be more talks on development. I think we impact fertility more with how we develop bulls than what their heritability would be on it. So, yes, sir. So yes, not true data. So I spent 2 years at the Fort Keogh Range Station in Miles City, Montana. And when we would turn bulls out into multiple sire pastures, some of those pastures would be 400 to 600 acres with, rough terrain through them. What was interesting is a lot of times the bulls would separate out into their own little herds. And the only time they would come together is when we call them up because we were feeding and counting them. And so when you look like that, your bull to female ratio is actually going to stay about the same because they sort off in their own little groups. When you're in smaller pastures, you're going to end up with more fighting and more details like that as you get more bulls out in the pasture. Does that make sense? I think Shelby's telling me I'm out of time. I will be around if you have any other questions. Thank y'all very much.